it is on. Someone said good Jedi a little earlier.
Okay.
That's not real. There are no good Jedi.
Here's Sarat.
Oxymoron.
All right, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Woo. My name is Alex Bellisario. I use she, her pronouns. I work at the University of California, Santa Cruz as the Executive Director for College Student Life, and I'll be moderating this hour's panel, The Doctor is In. And so we have a couple of panels, as you know, for GeekEd today, and some of them deal with some pretty heavy topics. I think this one is one of the lighter ones, and maybe hopefully inspirational in case you've been considering or have an interest in looking at a doctorate or some form of higher education in higher ed, and want to be able to tie in your interests, your personal interests, the things that have been passions that you've had perhaps since a young age or recently developed. We always love when people find their gateway into geekness. So we're going to be talking about that this morning. I have this esteemed panel here who is going to talk to you today about how potentially to achieve your dream of using those interests in getting a doctorate, in PhDs or EDDs. And I'm going to have them introduce themselves with a couple of topics, or a couple of pieces about themselves. So who they are, their pronouns, job title, where you work, all the usual, and then, of course, as is perfect for this panel, who your favorite doctor is.
Awesome.
Okay, so we'll start with Emily and go down the line.
All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Dr. Emily Sandoval, she, her, hers. I'm the Associate Vice Provost for Student Engagement and Development at the University of Southern California. And I know you didn't ask us this, but I got my EDD, so my Doctor of Education. And my favorite doctor was actually really difficult, so I'm going all television here. So I had to write them down so I didn't forget. So Dr. Temperance Brennan from Bones, Dr. Amy Farrah Fowler from Big Bang Theory, and then Dr. Christina Yang and Dr. Bailey from Grey's Anatomy. I'm still watching Grey's Anatomy, but I think all of those are for women who speak their mind and own what they know. So,
Nice.
And that's some staying power with Grey's Anatomy. Impressive.
yes.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. LaTanya Rase Miles, also known as LT. My pronouns are she, her. I'm currently a partnership director for a company called ReUp Education, and I'm a former dean at Menlo College. I have a Ph.D., and walk with me for a minute as I explain my favorite doctor. So my passion is serving first-generation college students, and often by definition, those students are entering foreign spaces. And many of these students are brilliant, and sometimes tensions arrive when they get to our institutions, and they're encountering folks who've been there before, who are well-resourced, who are coming from a college-going background. We also know about first-generation students that they typically are not just going to college for themselves. It may seem like they have a chip on their shoulder, but sometimes they're there to give back to their country, to their home communities. And sometimes those plans may blow up in their faces. All that to say, Dr. Doom.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Dr. Alfred. I use he, him, his pronouns. I currently serve as the Assistant Vice Chancellor for Student Support and Belonging at the University of California, Berkeley. My favorite doctor is currently the Doctor from Doctor Who.
Yes.
Most currently played by Ncuti Gatwa. In this first season, he was in it. It was wonderful. And so I'm going to go with the Doctor as my favorite doctor.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Dr. Drea Letamendi. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist. I work at UCLA. That's my day job. It's at UCLA. The Associate Director of Mental Health Training, Intervention, and Response there. My second hustle is as a media psychologist, so I consult with entertainment media companies, gaming companies. I've had contracts with Marvel, Warner Brothers, home entertainment. I do on-camera commentary. My last project was super cool. It was all about the film Aliens, and it's called Aliens Expanded, and I'm the psychological consultant on that documentary. My pronouns are she, her, ella. And
Favorite doctor?
favorite doctor. Oh, and by the way, my Ph.D. is from UCSD, so I'm super happy to be back in San Diego. Favorite doctor, so the 10th Doctor, David Tennant, is one of my favorite doctors. I want to say Dr. Hannibal Lecter is another favorite doctor.
Late great.
Uh-oh, it's going to be an interesting panel.
That's another panel.
That's awesome. And I didn't mention, I think my favorite doctor of the moment, my housemate is very good at watching shows in order. So we've been watching the Star Trek shows in order, especially the ones on Paramount, for as long as we keep a Paramount subscription. And so Dr. Hugh on the Discovery, I've been enjoying him quite a bit. I think the way that he seems to embrace everyone as they are, to encourage mental health as well as physical health, to do a lot of mentorship for younger people. It's just that I think speaks to me at the moment. And so LT's going to start with sharing your doctoral origin story.
Yeah, so I mentioned I have a PhD, and I went to graduate school with the intention of being a full-time faculty member in an English department, a traditional PhD, traditional canonical department at UCLA. And this actually is tied to my first generation identity as well. So part of what I was trying to figure out is my voice in this, and watching colleagues who were writing about traditional authors, right? And so there was a period of time where I was mimicking what they were doing, right? Like, oh, this is what it means to write a dissertation. This is what it means to do this type of work. And it just wasn't fitting. So imposter syndrome really set in, because I started thinking, well, maybe this isn't for me, right? So I give a lot of credit to my co-chairs, my advisors, who were really telling me to lean into my own interests. Well, lo and behold, that led me to basketball, which is, I tell people I don't come from a college-going background. I come from a sports-loving and basketball-loving background. And I really embraced that. So I ended up writing my dissertation about Black masculinity and basketball narratives. And again, it's not sociology, so it's really about representation. But then I realized many dissertations, you're writing about yourself. There's some part of you typically that's in that. So that's what I started to explore at a time when our department, again, was not, and we weren't UCLA English department is not known for its pop culture at that time. And things have changed since then, but as I've been doing in my life, just sort of pioneering and creating a path, and trusting in myself that the thing that I was writing about was something that was, we'll talk about this a bit more, but something that was important, right, and valuable. And so I was writing in that kind of department. But I will say, Alex, I did have a lot of support from my committee, even though they had no idea what I was talking about.
Go
Okay,
ahead.
so my doctoral origin story.
Doctoral.
I would say I never set out to get a doctorate. I think it's important to know that I am 1.5 gen, I call myself, because my brother and sister are 9 and 8 years older than me. So I think they were the first gen students, and I kind of learned through them a little bit. Not that they told me how to navigate college by any means, but they both have PhDs. They are both tenured full faculty at other universities, really focused on work in Chicano-Chicanx studies, history, politics, pop culture. My sister has an amazing exhibit at the Peterson right now on low writing. She's an expert on low writing in Los Angeles and the culture. So I knew I didn't want to be them. I grew up not wanting to be them, wanted to pave my own way. So I kind of fell into my master's degree. And then after our 2011 GeekEd panel, it was the first year we did it, I blame L, sitting here, as part of my origin story, because he looked at me, he's like, you're young enough, to go back to grad school and may turn this into a dissertation. I was like, what are you talking about? And I did. I started grad school in 2014. So there's more to that story coming later, but I will say, Al, you are officially part of my origin story of becoming a doctor, and thank you.
Don't thank me when the student loan payments come. I guess I can jump off of that. So I was encouraging Emily, and I told Emily, you're young enough to do it because I'm a little bit older. And then I decided to do it because I'm like, yeah, a middle-aged man should probably decide to start a doctorate. And so my origin story is I started in 2019, my doctoral EDD program at UC Davis. And I chose it specifically because I didn't want to do remote learning. And I don't know if you all remember in 2020 something happened, and the rest of my degree was remote learning. But
Joke's on you.
right, but similar to folks, my initial dissertation topic was going to be looking at. It was so boring. I can't even. It was a very dry topic about looking at case management, risk assessment tools, and whether or not they had biases. And I couldn't even get through the sentence without falling asleep. And then, quite honestly, when the pandemic happened, and I was talking to so many different people about what they were doing with the pandemic and how they were getting through, particularly people in higher ed, and I realized that really my passion was popular culture in higher ed, and my whole life had been formed by my parasocial relationships with fictional characters. I don't know if you can tell, but I'm a DC Comics fan. And I started talking with people about sort of how they were using their relationships with fictional and media characters to cope with and get through the pandemic. And so that ended up being my dissertation topic. And really it's about, for folks who are considering it, like whatever dissertation topic you pick, you better be something you can be interested in, because oh my God, it's a lot of work if you're going to be bored with your topic.
Yeah, I didn't plan to do any of this. I think if I really try to trace down that pathway, it's very zigzaggy, and I think that's true for a lot of us, for a lot of reasons, right? The messages we get about our value and what fields and careers we should look into. For me, I think it did start when I was a kid, being immersed in pop culture and media entertainment and seeing myself on screen in those ways. And then when I think about going into college and then thinking about grad school, there was actually a long period of time where I erased and denied a lot of my geek identity for survivorship. Like, I'm just even lucky to be at the table in the room. When I got into my Ph.D. program, I realized, this is going to be a long, marathon. And so I'm just being transparent. I put a lot of my geek identity aside to focus on, the course, right? Like, finish the degree. And it was very enjoyable for me as far as like the discipline. I studied clinical psychology. My dissertation was in the intergenerational impact of combat PTSD and OEF, returning veterans and service members. So I was doing a very rigorous, very research-heavy PhD. But things really merged and became almost like fully aligned toward the end of my PhD, and that's where I'd say the origin story really manifested, right? I realized I can use my knowledge in clinical science to disseminate public health information, to speak at comic conventions, to write papers and articles about the impact of media literacy. And for me, I started to realize, like, I really wanted to be that lab coat in the lab and doing the hard research and, being in the ivory tower. And then I realized I don't see other people like me there, but I don't see myself there. I feel like I could, my mutant gene is like, your powers are in something else, right? So I went into a completely different avenue, which was really, not chartered, right? So like, there's no manual for what I started doing, but it felt right. This will be my 15th year as a speaker at Comic-Con, and I really think getting my PhD got me through the door, and ultimately, I think about all of the media engagement I had growing up. That is what gave me the passion for this work.
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the things that's so great about this particular panel too is to see and hear the interest that you have, and hopefully for some of you, you're finding a connection to that, or you've thought about it before and thought, right, that's what they're doing. Like this is, and I think for those of us in GeekEd, as we started GeekEd, it was just the connection to each other and the connection to some of our interests that brought us together. And then we found this place, and each year as we present, we meet new people who are interested in talking about it or in similar subjects. And then you have like these, year-long conversations about things with people who have these common interests. So even if it's not exactly in your space where you are every day, like the connections that I think have also been strengthened over time as we learned that, we were isolated in spaces and then coming together online or in other, through shared interests, just has been able to grow and develop in ways that we hadn't anticipated. But Emily, do you want to start us off on the next question about how you determined your research topic?
Yes.
Yes.
So a little bit, my research topic focused on building community on college campuses utilizing geek identity. So for the non-higher ed folks, there's two theories I used. It's very basic, sense of belonging and involvement theory that basically says if someone feels like they belong to something, they're more likely to succeed. And the more involved you are at a college campus or probably even high school, anywhere, the more likely you are to succeed. So I based it all around geek identity and geek culture. And my why, there's two things that stand out to me. So I'm 44 years old. Star Wars has always been a part of my life. And I didn't grow up thinking that it was weird to be a geek or a nerd. I was in the 80s, so dweeb was also used. But I really look up to my older brother. And I realize now, and there's one memory that sticks out, and he was having a Star Wars marathon at his friend's house. And he took his little sister with him to hang out with a bunch of high school guys. And they didn't treat me any differently. They're not like, oh, Tom's kid sister is tagging along. I was just welcomed as part of that group. And that really set the foundation of me loving Star Wars, but also being accepted into this group as a kid sister. So when I went to high school, I gravitated towards people who liked similar things, and I wasn't part of the popular group. The 90s, it wasn't, this is before MCU, before things have gotten really big. So we were kind of on the fringe, so to speak. But as I got to college and then beyond, and I flash forward to 2011, we presented that night GeekEd for the first time. And by the way, we have a website now, geekedcollective.com, plug. But that night, I was standing next to Alex, and two female-identified high school-age students came up to us, and they looked at us. And Alex, I don't know if you remember this. Yeah, because it was powerful. They're just like, you're geeks. Yes. They're like, and you're girls. Yes. And at that moment, like we always say, representation matters. And in that moment, we had two high school students just looking at us in awe because we were owning our nerddom, owning that we were geeks. And that was my why. That was like, I need to talk to college students who haven't been finding their place, to talk about how they found their community, how they found their connection. And that became my dissertation. So it comes back to the little girl that's still inside of me, who geeks out about things, having my brother who really opened my eyes to geek stuff, but then realizing I wanted to tell the story of college students who didn't find their foot on their college campus initially and how they found the place that they belong. So that's my why.
Nice. This is a nice point to do a bit of a contrast. So like I said, I was in an English department, and so our methods are different. So we're, by virtue of being in the humanities, we're focused on close reading and close analysis. I didn't interview. IRB didn't have to do that, right? I know. I was like, what the hell is this? I mean, it's good to hear these differences, though, right? So you can kind of know that there's options out there. So for me, being like a so-called traditional department, I'm reading a lot of books and whatnot, and so already I'm activated to see things related to sport. And I was taking a contemporary African American literature course, and noticed that there were these moments in these narratives where basketball would just sort of appear. And I was like, what is up with that? Like, what is the meaning? And I think that's what's really important about a dissertation topic, are just like Emily was saying, what are the questions that it starts to arise for you? And it's like an itch you just like continually go, you're like, what is it? What is it? And so for me, it was seeing these moments where there were Black men in these spaces in which their own identity as being Black men was questioned. Like, they were starting to wonder, am I really Black? Am I authentically Black as I start this new job, or I start this new career? And then a basketball court would appear, right? I'm like, what is it? This is in the work of John Edgar Wideman, for example, and I wanted to explore that. What is the meaning of basketball in these spaces? And so that was in some of the, some literature, but it's also in TV shows. It was showing up in commercials. It's in the movie Finding Forrester. Finding Forrester is not a basketball movie, but these basketball scenes. And so I really wanted to, like I said, just explore it further, put it within the context of modern African American literature. So my dissertation project is not really about basketball, it's about Black masculinity, and I really wanted to challenge the representation of Black masculinity, because in some cases, the texts were saying, oh, in order to be a real Black man, you have to play basketball. And so I really wanted to push that, like, well, where are the women, where are the queer folks? I was really going in that direction. So my dissertation starts with a traditional text, like traditional literature by John Edgar Wideman. It includes analysis of Michael Jordan's autobiography. So keep in mind, I'm not a sociologist. I'm not talking about Michael Jordan. I'm talking about the representation of Michael Jordan, does that make sense? And then it goes to one of my favorite books, The White Boy Shuffle. If you don't know it, please read it. It's about basketball in LA. It's fantastic. So that's the sort of, I'm skipping some pieces there, but that's the trajectory of my dissertation as a whole. And again, it's really about understanding my background as well.
So yeah, as I mentioned, I was in school during COVID, and I was then and am now single. Slow down, ladies. And when COVID hit, I was writing it out by myself. And
You're
it
a
was
catch,
tough.
though. I mean,
What's that?
you're a catch, though.
I am.
Okay.
I mean, come on.
Let's just be clear, but keep
I'm
going.
just saying, free tickets to Comic-Con on the table. And I was also in an EDD program, and one of the things, the distinction between an EDD program, Doctor in Education, and a Ph.D. program, Doctor of Philosophy, is EDD programs are meant for practitioners. And it's very sort of pragmatic and how you apply it to the work you're doing. And working in higher ed student affairs, I was talking to a lot of colleagues a lot of us went remote, a lot of people were isolated, people were having a really tough time, particularly those who were isolated. Really difficult time during the early days of the pandemic that stretched into the long days of the pandemic. And in having conversations with people, a lot of times it came up, oh my God, I just sat and binged Gilmore Girls for 2 days straight. Or I just sat and binged Friends again, 10 seasons of Friends, and I'm starting at the beginning. And I started to ask the question of, I know for me in my life, comic books and media and parasocial relationships, first gen student, and I didn't have a lot of role models growing up for how to be in the world. And for me, it was DC Comics, right, that showed me how to be in the world. And just talking to other people, I started to do research on parasocial relationships and how, as a matter of fact, Marcel was talking about it in the previous panel, how parasocial relationships can mirror real world relationships, particularly for folks who have a social deficit. that for folks in social deficit, which define most people during the COVID-19 pandemic, these can become real critical. And most of the research, my initial research was how negative that was really based on, can you believe these people can't get real relationships? But once I really dug into and got to the heart of the relationship, how this really mattered for people and was a survival strategy for a lot of folks in the world. But then I combined it with my colleagues in higher ed, particularly folks who lived on campuses, who were in this very weird dilemma that if you're in a live-in staff, particularly in the early days of higher ed, you had to live with students who weren't really great about COVID-19 restrictions, which also meant you were probably exposed to things and couldn't go spend time with family. So you were sort of really isolated by the nature of your work. And so I really started to examine sort of how this was affecting people during what I call the Great Distress era. This is important. Not just COVID-19 was happening at that time, so I coined the phrase the Great Distress era. If you recall, it was the Black Lives Matter protests, it was the election, it was January 6th. There were attacks on elders in Asian communities. All of these stressful things were happening during this period of time. So in my dissertation, I talk about the Great Distress period because we look back on it and just think of COVID-19. Everything was happening at the same time. It was this very strange and unique moment in time that really impacted people. And so my origin was really trying to look, for me, at how this period was affecting the people that I work with. And it kind of helped me get through, doing that research helped me get through COVID. And then I got a dog. So.
Look, I went rogue. When you're in neuroscience, clinical science, psychological science, it's not as if the field is limited, but you definitely need to stay in research work that will add to the existing fields. So, and I was very loyal to that. I'm not going to diss my field, but I will say my adventures in clinical psychology were very empowering, and also I saw how gatekeeping the sciences can be. So, look, I was like, I just got to do everything I'm supposed to do to graduate and to get a job. But while I was doing, I'm extra, so while I was doing my dissertation, I was doing a side project. And I was doing a research study on the psychology of cosplay. And I was really lucky because a mentor at Stanford, who was a very seasoned research psychologist, kind of like took me in and noticed my work at Comic-Con and noticed my social media posts and saw my interests and said, do you want to do some research with me? And I was also a cosplayer. Now, no one in my graduate program knew any of that, right? And I went to graduate school here and would come to Comic-Con like full cosplay. No one knew. Anyhow, so I did this side project on the psychology of cosplay, and it was really sort of like very illuminating as a research project, but also that is what allowed me to sort of have that sense of the why that folks are talking about. Okay, so this, research matters, clinical science matters, but this piece of it really allowed me to just find that sense of authentic career work that I had been looking for. And honestly, it was extra work, but it helped me stay on track, and by the way, our findings we actually had 2 publications on this, and our findings were that people who this is weird to say this now, this was like, umpteen years ago, but at the time it was really powerful stuff. We found that cosplayers were, first of all, clinically healthy, like psychologically healthy. It's so weird to have to say this, but 15, 20 years ago, adults who cosplay were kind of stigmatized, right? So we found that there's no difference between cosplayers and non-cosplayers around mental health and factors around those elements. But we also found that when people cosplay, they actually feel more like themselves. So we found that these experiences of cosplay enhanced their personality traits. So even when you're cosplaying characters that are, fictional, speaking of parasocial relationships, villains, heroes, in between, they found that actually brought out their personality traits, and that when they were at places like Comic-Con, community engagement, togetherness, and being validated and affirmed by other cosplayers was really healthy for them. And so that sort of rogue research project really helped me continue to stay on this path and actually finish my program, and then help me kind of pivot into what I was going to do in my career.
That's awesome. That reminds me, I was having a conversation with someone just a couple of weeks ago about Second Life.
Yeah, Second Life.
And it seems like that is similar, right? You can be yourself in a place where not everybody has a already preconceived notion of you, like you're able to explore more parts of yourself. And I think that you all have touched on ways that you've learned about interests that you had deep down or things that you thought were important. But Al, do you want to talk a little bit? You can start it off. Something that maybe you learned about yourself or your students that you're working with as you did this research.
Absolutely, and it actually really mirrors this I know everyone in this room will be shocked, but higher ed can be a very pretentious, snooty place.
No way.
I know, it's shocking. And in my career, I've always felt a little outside of that. I'm sitting in meetings and people are, what's your favorite student development theory and Brene Brown and da-da-da-da, and I'm like, I don't know. I know more about Charlie Brown than I do about Brene
Please
Brown.
quote him. Please, someone tweet that.
And to your point, Drea, one of the things I learned not only through the dissertation process, but it became sort of focused during the dissertation process is I feel most myself literally on these panels at Comic-Con because it takes the love I have for the work I do in higher education and really marries it with who I am in my truest sense and my core, which is, look, I'm a nerd. I have always been a nerd. I knew I was a nerd before I knew I was black because everybody in my house was black. Right? It just was. Not everybody in my house was nerdy, but everybody in my house was black. And I'm really interested in your research about black masculinities because you were talking about how sort of the narrative, and I think about the hero's journey piece and how that may be the portal through which sort of black masculinity narratives have to sort of move through. And I think also mine was when I tripped over on the basketball court and broke my knee and then couldn't, because my best friend from my whole life, Anthony, is here. We grew up together, and neither one of us was really picked for, I don't think anybody was saying, let's get Al and Anthony for the team. But, if there was anybody in 1985 who really needed to know what comics you needed to buy, they could come to me. Now, nobody wanted that information. Anthony did. He would ask me from time to time. But in general, what I learned about myself was that I have always felt a little outside of higher ed, and that's okay. Because I have a place that I can carve out for myself. And I'm 55, I've been doing higher ed for 30 years, right? I'm 54, I'll be 55 in a week and a half. So I still get
Jumping
10
ahead.
days.
Yeah.
But how important it is for me, even at my stage of my career and at my stage of development, because we continue to develop our whole life, how important it is to find a place for you is really critical.
What was the question?
Oh. The question is, was there something in particular you learned about yourself or students you were around through the course of your study?
Yeah,
research?
yes. And I think, similar to Al, it was a journey to learn how much of myself I can foreground and be open about, and it's experimental, right? How much of myself should I erase here and there? Code switching, learning how to survive in academia, in the sciences, and then also in higher ed. So my journey in higher ed is actually more recent because after I got my Ph.D., I went into foster care work. So I was doing a lot of community behavioral health work outside of academia, and that was all dissemination work, getting what we know about clinical science and psychological science, interventions for anxiety, trauma, depression, suicidality into the community, and making sure that what we know in the ivory tower is in the community, right? So I did that for quite some time. Higher ed was a whole different game for me. So once I joined UCLA, thanks to Brian McDonald, who I know is wandering around here somewhere, back there. So Brian apparently noticed that I was doing a lot of education and scholarly work, and sort of blended pop culture and entertainment media and education, and that's what brought me to UCLA in higher ed. So in higher ed was almost another chapter, another phase of like, all right, so I'm going to be at UCLA. This is cool. I can, I'm going to be liberated from all the identity-related trauma I've had. And no, that's the lesson that I think a lot of us learn is, so this was not in the question, but in X-Men, there's a character called Beast. And I relate to Beast a lot because Beast is basically like, look, I'm going to get your degrees. I'm going to read your books. I'm going to speak like you. I'm going to present in all the different ways to be successful and be accepted into, in Beast's world, like, the non-mutant world. And for me, it was sort of the higher education world, or, the majority communities. And I relate to that a lot, which is like, you can do all those things, and it's still almost day-to-day wrestling with how much of this really is me, and how much of me can I fully foreground and authentically present. And I bring up that character because there are times when Beast does all the right things and still ends up being marginalized. Right. In the first animated series, Beast is in prison the entire first season, despite all of his education, his scientific endeavors, the ways in which he's doing a lot of good in the world. And so I think that's a good lesson for me, that, no matter how much I achieve, not to get lost in the sauce, right? Like, not to assume that I'm going to get in the door, I'm going to be at the table, or even today to be on this panel. So I have a lot of, I think, just a sense of humility and gratefulness about this kind of work.
I'll keep my answer short in terms of what I learned about myself. I'm glad I went to college when I did, because I was, playing video games, using my VCR to record episodes of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. If I was a college student now, I don't know I would be that successful academically, because I'd want to get involved in every single geek-like student organization, and be it board games or tabletop games, video games, like all the shows. Star Wars and Marvel just keep coming out with things. Like, there's just so much to consume. I'm really grateful that I was a college student in the 90s because I was able to not be distracted, and I was an English literature major, so I'm a book geek. So I was able to really dive into my Shakespearean classes, my Gothic literature class, my queer Brit lit classes. Like, those are what I enjoyed consuming at the time, so I'm just grateful that I went to college when I did.
I don't know, I think it's still pretty distracting. I had to play video games when you couldn't save a game, right? So you keep it on the TV
so hard
until you came back.
Yeah.
So that was pretty distracting.
No one understands hard like Atari and NES, like original. Yeah.
Exactly.
I'm mad that you brought that up, Alex. It's very triggering. I'll talk about students really quickly, because as I was writing my dissertation, I was also teaching, and I was teaching, there's one particular course, it was called English A. Once upon a time, students out of high school had to take the Subject A exam in California, and that determined your English writing placement. And if you did not pass that class, you had to take English A. So kind of like a developmental class. I was one of the instructors. It was only taught 2 times a year at UCLA, and I taught one of those sections. And so imagine being admitted to UCLA, right? You might be a class valedictorian, really strong student, and suddenly you're in Subject A. Those students, English A, those students often right out the gate, low confidence, right? Did I really get into UCLA? Something must be wrong with me. So what I used a lot and I gained confidence in doing was incorporating a lot of pop culture into that class. And so you took subject English A, and then you went on to take 2 more classes before you could even get credit for writing. So I had student athletes, I had class valedictorians, and I just like took the pressure off them, and we started talking, let them talk to me about what was important, and we might have a conversation about what scene does Michael Corleone become the Godfather? What one scene, not the whole movie, one scene only, and you had to defend it. And I would tell them, and they had all kinds of like arguments about this, right? That's evidence. You're learning how to talk about evidence. And I said, if you could do this, you can do that, right? And so that was a great moment for all of us as a collective, I would say.
It's clearly the restaurant. I mean, it's the restaurant.
People debate it.
They're wrong. It's the restaurant.
Okay, so we're running a little bit short of time, so I'm going to throw out 2 questions, and then you can decide which of those 2 you'd like to answer. Okay. We always do this. We're going to have time for people to ask questions at the end, and then we get super excited about what we're talking about. So, either how is your research changing the world? We said the field, but really the world. How is it changing the world? And, or do you have suggestions for people who are thinking about getting their doctorate?
Sometimes I'll see students at UCLA, so I do a little bit of counseling services there, and I've had a couple of students say that they've been discouraged from even being interested in a Ph.D. And so we'll have those conversations about like, what are the barriers that you're seeing? Why are you feeling discouraged? And I think just having those conversations around, sharing that it may seem like there's only one way to do this, and I felt the same way going into the PhD. I mean, I had to like do things on the side, and now I share that very openly. There's the job that I have now didn't exist when I was in a PhD program, and that's actually very exciting, right? So you could really, reframe the practice and the scholarly work that you're doing, and even and really dedicate your work in a way that you'll open up these opportunities for yourselves and the communities. So often I'll try to just encourage this sense of like, there's not one way to do it, and here's how I sort of pursued this career and did some things very differently. And I think I just try to dismantle this idea that you're not going to survive in a PhD program, or it's too long, or it's not affordable. All of these barriers that I think, especially in my mentorship, BIPOC and first-gen students talk about with me. I think too, your question about research. I still do research. I still publish papers, and my most recent chapter is using cognitive behavioral therapy with Star Wars, and it's just the entire chapter is about how Star Wars can help in the therapeutic and clinical applications. And so I'll actually open up that chapter and show it to a student and say, like, this is the kind of work that is available to us. Once you find the thing that you're passionate about and intersect them, and really forge your own path. And I don't look. I'm not going to say that's changing the world, but I think if that impacts that young scholar just to think about pursuing higher ed and graduate studies, I feel like that's what I'm supposed to be doing.
I think what I would say is how I hope it's changing the world is when I was putting together my dissertation, one of the things I realized was research in higher ed, for good reason, is primarily focused on students. And what I discovered is my research was one of the few studies focused on the practitioners of higher ed and the impact of a very, very unique work environment and very unique set of circumstances on the people who do the work. And a lot of us got together for coffee before this, and a big part of that conversation was how difficult working in higher ed is right now, and how so many people are maybe not going to survive the work in higher ed because of the intensity of the work right now. And so what I hope is more research on how the work impacts practitioners and how we can better support practitioners of the work in addition to the research that's being done on student lives.
First, I'll say, even though my dissertation was on basketball, I didn't publish about it, I didn't write about it, and I think that's a good lesson for those of you who are thinking about graduate school. In other words, you don't have to just stick with one topic. I now work almost exclusively in higher education. I have no degrees in higher education. But when it comes to the work that I am currently doing, my goal is to challenge the way people perceive first-generation college students in mass media and pop culture. And so I wrote the Wikipedia bio for Breonna Taylor, who's a first-generation student. I opened by talking about Dr. Doom. These narratives about first-gen students are everywhere, but oftentimes not pointed out as such. Typically, when people talk about first-generation students, it's a struggle narrative and how much we didn't know and didn't do, and we really need to disrupt that and talk about all the strengths that we do bring, and also point out where we're seeing these stories all over the place. So that's really my goal, and also to disrupt the publishing industry as well.
I'll just add that if you're thinking of continuing your education, be it a master's degree writing a thesis or a doctoral degree with a dissertation, if you think that there aren't faculty who'll support you, you're wrong.
Yeah.
So take the time to get to know some of the faculty in your program. The first sentence out of my mouth when I met my advisor was like, so I present at Comic-Con, and her face lit up. I was like, I found it. She had a TARDIS on her desk. So I knew that I found the right faculty advisor, but what's really great is most places for doctoral programs, it's a team of 3. So you have your lead chair and you have other folks. And it's also using your network, because technically all of us here could be a third chair. So there are people that aren't necessarily teaching in classrooms, but have the Ph.D. or the Ed.D. that could serve as a support as well. So we're out there, ask questions and talk to your faculty even about your passions, because that's how you'll find the right person.
Awesome, thank you so much. We have just a couple minutes. Is there a question that someone has that you'd like to ask our panelists? Oh, yes.
Sure. Are we assuming that they aren't inspired in the first place, or?
So I guess just for a little bit of context, one of my students just last week, he was basically telling me, when I'm in these community college programs, a lot of the time it just feels like I'm just going to get this degree, I'm going to go work in industry, I'm going to go work for some company, be a cog in the machine. And what he really liked is that some of the research that I was showing to him that's out there, he had never heard of it before, he'd never seen it before, and it was really inspiring to him to be, kind of exposed to this whole new world of possibilities that he could be able to do.
Yeah, well, it sounds like you were on that pathway too, right? In terms of helping the student identify what their that's what we've been talking about, is finding your passion and connecting with something that they've already accomplished. Like, by virtue of getting where they are, they've done something right? And so how do you sort of build upon that? And we can talk more about that on the side, but it sounds like you were headed in that right direction.
I would also say demystifying academia would go a long ways.
Yeah.
I work at Berkeley. I am contractually obliged to say the #1 public university in the world. Well, this is my point. The point I'm making with that.
Wait, hold up.
UCLA is nice
Surrounded by
too,
ruins.
but you have to talk to an agent before you can even get in there. But demystifying it would go a long ways, because there is this image, this idea that a life in academia is only for the elite, is only
Right.
for the
Yeah.
sort of
That's right.
inherently gifted. It's a lot of work, but I'm a broke ass kid from Merced, California, and I'm the first generation. my family who loves me had no idea. It's not that they decided they weren't going to help me. They had no idea. They had no
How.
reference. They
That's
didn't know
right. It's
how
the how.
to help. So I had to make my way.
Right.
And here on the other side of it, the thing that I know is it was a lot of work, but it wasn't hard. And it was hard work, but it wasn't impossible. And I do think there's an industry or a movement out there to make it be like, oh, not for you.
Yeah.
And
Oh,
the
yeah.
farther you can go to demystify that process, no, it's for you. You can do research. You can pursue a master's, all that sort of thing. It makes sense.
Absolutely. And on that note, we have run out of time. Thank you so much for being with us this morning. And to our panelists. We'll continue to be here on the side because I know there was at least one other question that we're happy to answer, but thanks so much.